Okay, today's headline is Girl Kills Man Who Laughed at Her Demand That He Marry Her. This occurred in Brooklyn, New York, October 1908. Could you imagine being at your lowest and scared and needing someone and then they just laugh at you? I'm Angela and welcome to my channel. I am a history teacher who likes to use crime and criminal cases, especially of women who kill, as a way to teach history, because a lot of these crimes reflect larger issues in society at the time. So we're going to get into the details because let me tell you, the newspapers were playing games with this one. So it's 1908, and I guess there was a lot of newspapers who were trying to be very conservative in how they approached the story. You have to read in between the lines because the newspapers were not going to outright say what led to her demanding this of him. Nellie was 19. She started seeing Edward when she was 19, and perhaps she probably started seeing him sooner than that. It is October 1908, and Nellie is trying to get in contact with Edward, and he's kind of ignoring her. She can't get a hold of him, and she's desperately trying to contact him. And so she sees him out and about in the world. It's nighttime, and so she follows him to figure out where he actually lives, which he didn't know she was following him. Then she goes home. The following night, she comes back, and she goes into his apartment, and they start talking, and she tells him, "You have to marry me." And he laughed. And he said, "I am not marrying you." This angered Nellie, and she pulls out a gun and shoots. Her story, her account is that she shot once, but we know from the police reports she shot twice. The first one missed, and the second one was a headshot straight on that instantly killed this man. Just like that, he's dead. And he falls in front of her. He falls dead in front of her, and she's like, "Oh my God, he's dead." So she freaks out. She runs out of the house. She runs out of his house. She's running by the dogs, and she sees the East River, and she jumps into the river. This is New York City in October. It is cold in New York City in October, and she jumped into that river, and most likely she went into shock, and she starts flailing around. And just so happens that as she's running through the crowd, a police officer notices her erratic behavior as she's running. So he starts watching her, and then he sees her jump, and he yells to the people around her, throw ropes in there and get her." Basically, Nellie was trying to commit suicide, but when she hit that cold water, she was like, "Nuh-uh, no." So she grabs onto these ropes, and she gets herself out of that water. And guess who's standing right there when she gets out of that water? The deputy. And the deputy starts questioning her. "Why are you jumping into this water? Why are you so upset? What is happening?" And she's like, my boyfriend accidentally shot himself, and I got freaked out, and I decided I was going to kill myself too since he's dead. He accidentally killed himself." That's her story. He accidentally killed himself. And so the officer, he played it well. He was like, "Okay, well, take me to the crime scene and let me see what happens." She takes him back to Edward's apartment, and Edward is still there, dead, on the floor. And they also find in the corner her jacket, her hat, and then a gun. Whose gun? It's a gun. She says he was trying to get the gun away from her. It goes off and shoots himself in the head. Now, the officer was not born yesterday. He looked at how the room was, and he's like, "You need to tell me the truth." She starts becoming hysterical. More police come. They try to interview her, and eventually it either happens in the apartment or it happens when they get her to the hospital. But she admits at some point that, yes, I might have killed him. Then she takes it back and says, no, I didn't kill him. I didn't kill him. He killed himself. I didn't do it. She goes to the hospital and she is in there and she's under suicide watch. And then, of course, it's October in New York and this girl just jumped into this river that is freezing. She also appears to get sick. Now, according to newspapers, she gets pneumonia and she struggles with pneumonia for a year. But we're going to get into that. We're going to get into that because something ain't right. Something ain't right, okay? Calling out to the boyfriend and she's going in and out of, I didn't kill him. Oh, I think I might have killed him. You know, she's just all over the place. As she is in the hospital, the New York City police start investigating this whole situation. This is where it gets good because oftentimes we kind of look at the past and you're like, how do they really solve crimes? Because nowadays officers have so many resources that it's kind of easier for them than you would think back then because there's now cameras everywhere and stuff like that. But these police officers, they did some good old-fashioned detective work and they got this whole case together real quick. First thing the detectives did was find out where did this gun come from. And they found out this gun came from a pawn shop. They also found the person who sold the gun, and that person described Nellie to a T and said, yes, she got the gun yesterday. The same time she found out where Edward lived, after she found out, she went and got that gun. They also know that the gun did not come with bullets, so she had to go buy bullets. So they go to the hardware store. They identified Nellie as buying the bullets for that gun. They remember this young woman coming in, buying a gun. Not a very common thing, especially by herself. So they knew, they were able to remember her. And it happened in a short amount of time. There wasn't a huge lapse of time between her buying the gun and then her killing Edward. Then they had an autopsy done of Edward. The way that the bullet into his head, it came at an angle that physically he would not be able to do to himself. So he would not be able to actually shoot the gun at the angle and kill himself. That was the autopsy report. Into his head, it came at an angle that physically he would not be able to do to himself. So he would not be able to actually shoot the gun at the angle and kill himself. That was the autopsy report. So the district attorney charged her. And the two crimes that they charged her with, I was like, really? Really? The first one was homicide, which she killed someone. The second crime, which I'm like, why even put this in here? You know she's going to go down for the homicide. The second crime that they charged her with, attempted suicide. They actually went through all this effort and charged this girl with attempted suicide, which I could have been like, I tripped and fell into the river. Like, of all the crimes, you got the homicide, you got the gun, you got the autopsy. That is a, like, open and shut case. Why add suicide to this whole situation? It would just muddy up the case, because if they went to trial, she could say, I was suicidal, I was mentally unstable. Look, they even wrote it down in the case that I was suicidal and I should be held to get punished. So I just found that adding the suicide, I thought was more like giving her a defense or something, but they bring charges against her, but the trial is off for a year. This is why I was like, why is this trial off for a year? It doesn't make sense. The population is much smaller at this time. It shouldn't take a year. Literally, the police found everything within a couple of days of the murder. They found where she got the gun. They found all their evidence. And so one newspaper said, and this is where the confusion is. This is why this story was kind of difficult for me to piece together, because every newspaper article, normally they all say kind of the same thing, they say like gist of the same thing. This time, I found that each newspaper article would give you just a little bit extra that others didn't give you. They would give you like a little gem of information that you could piece together to really understand what is occurring in this year that she's not in trial. So one newspaper said she got pneumonia, which is kind of believable because you jumped in the river in October. It's probably dirty. It's probably dirty, and it's super cold. It's dirty and cold because at this time there is no environmental agency to keep the rivers and stuff clean. So it's dirty and it's cold. It's freezing, and you jump into it. So I kind of went with that. I was like, that could be the case, that this girl is basically just sick and trying to get over pneumonia. But then another newspaper article 4 years later randomly mentioned something that no other newspaper mentioned within the close time period of the crime. And it makes sense why they gave her a year before they did the trial. You want to guess what ailment she had? Well, she was pregnant. So it makes sense why she was demanding for him to marry her. None of the newspapers put in there that she was pregnant, that they were not married, and she was trying to get him to do the right thing according to the time period. Nowadays, some people get married, some don't. It's not as a big deal, but back then, not getting married and being pregnant was a huge deal. And she was only 19. We don't know if she had a support system. And he was only 20. He's young as well. But she was pregnant. And over that year, she had a little girl. That was Edward's baby, or she said it was Edward's baby. And that's could have explained why when he laughed, because I can just imagine she is desperate. She's freaked out. She's desperate. You're in a time period where these things are not acceptable, and he just laughed. I honestly think that's what she was going through. She was so angry. She knew that she was going to have a tough time. She knew that she might be shunned and talked about. And being a single mother, she might have just flipped out. But they never mentioned the child. Only later on do they actually mention the child, like 4 years later, that she has a daughter, and it's presumably Edward's. So during that year that she is pregnant and she has the child, we don't know where the child went. I couldn't find if the child went with Edward's family or her family, but the trial begins, and like I said, there was just too much evidence against her, and she is found guilty. Here's another confusing part about this story that I'm like, oh my God, I wish people would just get their story straight, which I should understand, because as I was looking at the different newspapers and stuff for this story, they were misspelling people's names. I'm like, this one newspaper made it like a full page headline and misspelled all the names. I'm like, they were close, but it was just an awkward misspelling and things like that. But all the newspapers were giving different dates. Some people said she got convicted for 4 years, 5 years. I really couldn't find how long she got sentenced, but she gets sentenced to jail. She's found guilty and she's sentenced. And this is where the story actually continues to pick up, because she serves about 3 to 4 years, and then she gets super sick, like very, very sick, with tuberculosis, also known as TB. So tuberculosis is a highly contagious virus that once you get it, you get diarrhea and you pretty much die fairly quickly, because oftentimes it was occurring amongst lower socioeconomic classes and things like that. And New York City was hit hard with TB in the early 1900s. Now, eventually, during this time, they do figure out what is causing it. It is caused by coming in contact with someone who has it, their fecal and urine and body fluids, and you somehow ingest it. And that's what caused TB. Now, during this time period, building standards and stuff like that were not all that great. And also toilets and stuff, especially in tenement housing. So as the Industrial Revolution occurs, millions of people start coming to the city, and the city's infrastructures are just not built for all of these people. So there's more people coming at a faster rate than the cities could actually build. And so what you have is tenement housing, where you take an apartment that used to have a single family, and now you turn every single room in that apartment into its own apartment. So a single family apartment with like 2 bedrooms and a bathroom will now house like 5 to 6 families in it. So everyone would get like one room. And in some of these tenements, because they were just stacking people in like sardines, I heard there was only like one toilet for every 600 people, and the toilets were getting backed up, and sewage was going into the water systems. And so people were ingesting contaminated water, and that is how the tuberculosis was spreading. And it's important to note that before they really realized how it was spreading, it blamed people. It was like, well, it's happening to poor people because they're dirty and they don't care, and they're just living in filth as if they want to live in filth. When in reality, they had to live in filth because those are the only places they could afford. And they were trying to do better, but if you don't have the money to do better, you kind of live in these circumstances and you try to be as clean as you can. But if there's no water, then you have to make do. And oftentimes you will see politicians and upper class people making tuberculosis seem like it was a hygiene problem. And if these poor people would just clean themselves and stop being animals, then it would go away. When in reality, the city needed to build better facilities. The city needed to improve housing. The city needed to improve and make sure the water was safe to drink. It wasn't about hygiene. It was about proper sewage systems and things like that did not exist, or they existed more in the rich areas. So when you saw rich people get tuberculosis, it was seen as, oh my God. But when poor people got it, it was just seen as they were just being unhygienic. And so it was just a time period. But in New York City, because New York City is so overcrowded at this time, tuberculosis just spread like that. It just went through like wildflower throughout the city, especially in the slums, the tenements, and things like that. So New York really tried to use science to figure out how can we fix this situation. And so one of the things they did was, when you got tuberculosis, they isolated you. They put you into these clinics, these hospitals, and they kept you isolated from the rest of the city until you got better and tested negative, or you died. Those were basically your 2 options to get out. You either got better through medications or whatever, or you died. That was the only way you could really get out of there. And they even had some cases, some actually very famous cases, where they just kept people there, and they're like, you're not leaving because you're not about to spread this to everyone. So New York City did take some extreme measures just to try to calm tuberculosis down and stop having so many outbreaks. So Nellie contracts tuberculosis while she is in jail, and she starts going down quickly. It got her quickly. So after her 4th year there, she contracted it. And as a result of this, what the governor did was he pardoned everyone who contracted it. So it looks like it could have been an outbreak in the prisons. And so they just had to get all the people who had it actually out of the prisons and into hospitals. And so he ended up pardoning her and others who all contracted tuberculosis in this prison in an effort to kind of stop it from spreading and getting them into the hospitals. And this pardon was extremely important to Nellie. And all the newspapers constantly said this. Every single newspaper said that she valued that pardon so much that she kept it in the hospital bed with her. As she was declining and about to die, they literally said she would just hold it in her hand all the time. And it was very important for her not to die a criminal. That was like one of her last wishes or something, was not to die a criminal. And so when she finally died, the pardon was underneath her pillow. And the only person that was with her, it has to be understandable that I'm sure she had family and I'm sure that they loved her very much. But the danger of going into these hospitals and then you catching tuberculosis was high. And so when she died, the only person that was there was a jail warden who had gotten close to her and spent her last moments with her. And so Nellie ends up dying 4 years after she is tried, and she was only 23. She ends up dying. And her case really helps to bring to light the tuberculosis issue that was happening and how these massive outbreaks would occur in prisons and stuff like that in New York City. And it was really, really bad. I could not find what happened to her child or anything like that. So that is all for today. I hope you enjoyed today's video and thank you for watching, and I will see you tomorrow